Today, I'm speaking with Antonino Iacona, a motion designer and director. Antonino's worked at Apple, Google Creative Lab, and is now running Studio Santo. We spoke about how his early years at Apple really was the sort of formation of his craft, where they worked on these long timeline, slow, iterative, detail-obsessed kind of design work, and how important that was for his growth and his sort of approach to things now. And then the shift to the slightly more experimental sort of mindset and approach to things at Google Creative Lab. Um, we spoke about something that Antonino has actually written about, which is about sort of designing motion with intent and the kind of difference between expressive motion and sort of more functional motion. The way that him and Ben, his co-founder, work very tightly from the start, blending the motion process and the design process as kind of like one iterative process rather than a sort of separate stages, and a discussion around really the value and the product of what Studio Santo offers its clients. Not necessarily finished MP4s or style frames, but really just sort of like identities, motion identities, flexible, collaborative toolkits, maybe even systems. And that was particularly interesting for me, who definitely works in a sort of more narrow, deliverable sort of marketing focus. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Antonino Iacona. So Antonino, you said to me offline that the kind of years that you had at Apple were where you really built your craft, at least the early stages of it. And I'd love to start there. Like, what was your role at Apple? We can cover all the other things that you've done. And why was working at Apple so formative for you?
I think for me, that's where I've learned my craft for sure. Um, I was hired as a senior motion designer. And one thing that stood out, it was the level of attention to detail was off the charts. I was working in the Markham team. And, the team really cared about the products. They believed in the brand. And so, first of all, like before Apple, I was working in a big consultancy. And like in any other agency, you have to think that you have like different sprints. So your timeline stretches between 2 or 3 weeks. But at Apple, actually, the timeline was slightly different. It was like from 3 months to 6 months. So you got a lot of time, to craft whatever you're working on. And for us was the first 2 weeks were like exploration phase. And we could come up with different ideas. Like they were telling us, look, don't think about if anything is doable or feasible. Don't try even to talk with developers, but just like come up with everything you think could work. And so we come up with our ideas, and then bit by bit, iteration after iteration, month by month, we reduced the extras, went through the core, the essence of the brand. And so when you see like even now the subtle rotation, the little spin, the nice sheen on the edges, that's really curated. And that's just a nudge to the essence of the brand.
So it's really about time and just like almost slowness compared to your average like deadline of most projects. Yeah. And we'll get onto Google Creative Lab later, but I'm interested, like, it, there's a lot of exploration in both, right? In a sense, with Creative Lab, the essence of the whole thing is about exploration and and finding the edges on things. But what's the difference, would you say, with that? Is there any difference in that early exploration phase at Apple versus when you're at Creative Lab?
I think the main difference actually is if at Apple I've learned my craft, a creative lab I've learned to be more experimental. That's the main difference.
In
Um,
those early stages of a project, is everyone's approach to that exploration different, or is it
no,
kind
it's
of
pretty much the
relatively?
same. It's pretty
Yeah,
much the
yeah,
same, I would say. Yeah,
yeah.
you think about the brand, how can you curate a piece that somehow express the brand's attitude? That's the core of the exploration phase.
So maybe it'd be useful to talk a little bit about some of the projects that you worked on, and yeah, not necessarily the processes involved, but like what you learned from it, or just things that are worthy of note. Because yeah, I'm just fascinated with what it's like working at Apple.
The main projects that I really remember with care are Behind the Mac and More on iPad. Behind the Mac was a campaign, and this was during COVID, where UK-based artists were caught in the moment of their craft. So you think about usually in a campaign you have photo shoots or they're staged, but this one was actually photos found on the internet, and they were like capturing the artist in the making, which for me was great. You know, something different. That's really unique. And we did like an interactive experience on apple.com where you have video and then you can stop the video, dive into the artist bios, and that gave you a sense of, you know, you can literally express yourself through the support of Apple's tech. And the other one was More on iPad. And More on iPad was, I think, 2019, 2020, where basically iPad was seen like a sort of product for people who liked to draw. That's it. But actually, there was more on iPad. There was like you could do different things, and they were like, we hire illustrators. You know, we did a bit of illustrations, and then we brought to life those illustrations and created like a lovely landing page on Apple.com.
Uh-huh. I, I'm interested, like, also over how many years was it? 4 years or 5 years you were there?
How much
How
years I
many years
spent
were
with
you
that?
at Apple? Yeah.
Three.
3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Like how much of the inspiration sort of and the way of working has stayed with you from that? Like you mentioned they were very formative in terms of your craft, but like does that also apply to like your taste and the way that you approach projects and processes and things like that?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, you know, especially when it comes down to motion design, because something that I really valued over there is motion is well considered. It's not an afterthought, you know, like it's not something like a nice to have at the end of a project. I think every time we have a project at Studio Santo, Ben and I will always think, you know, how motion could um, help the company reach their customers or their potential customers easier, or like how does it make the product more intuitive? How does it make the content more digestible? How do we express, you know, what the brand has to say just in a few movements? That comes from Apple.
Yeah, you mentioned either in this just now or offline about motion and design moving together. And I think you had this article about like just because it moves doesn't mean it's going anywhere or something like
Yeah.
that. I'd love to dig into this topic because I know it's important to you. And for people who haven't thought about this, obviously motion and design go together when you're doing motion design. But like, what are you really saying here? Like, what do you mean by considered?
That article I felt was something that I wanted to say and I felt was worth writing. Um, I think was late 2022, early 2023. And this was after COVID. So when people got back to attend events or talks, and and I attended a few of them, but I thought like there was this way of saying you need to make the brand move. You need to make the brand move. It was like I knew what they wanted to say. I knew the meaning, but kind of felt like when they were showing their pieces, I felt, you know, these are beautiful animations, but how do they connect to the core of the brand? And it's to me, it's important. You know, um, I think when you select the same care that you have when you select your palette or your typography or your color, your imagery, you have to think about motion in the same way. Think about, you know, you got an ecosystem and you have a motion design system. And within this system, you have to think what can be expressive and what can be functional. Um, I'm thinking about expressive is personality of the brand, while functional is how do we make the content more digestible? It's informative. How do we make the experience more intuitive? And so making just the brand move doesn't really say, we are really expressing the brand here. I'll give you like a simple example, right, to make it more more digestible for you. Like, let's assume for a moment that I give you financial advice. This is really important for you, right? This is something that you really care about. And while I'm doing this, I'm dancing like a TikToker. You were completely distracted by my movements. You wouldn't know where to look at. And in the same way, I can give you financial advice and build up an amazing choreography like a ballerina. For you, that is just a beautiful obstacle. So it's important to get that right.
I love the phrase "beautiful obstacle." I've never heard that before. I'm going to use
Yeah.
that. Because motion can be that. That's really interesting. So that's a really extreme example. I wonder whether you can draw on your memories of any other examples you've seen over the years, where or places where you've avoided that and made the motion more considered. Some a slightly more practical or like everyday example that someone might find where, a project doesn't quite work because the motion isn't considered enough. I see it all the time where there is just so much motion in something and it is inspiring, but it's often just inspiring for motion designers or people who aren't thinking about the whole brand.
Is designer for designers, right? It's motion without intent, motion for the sake of motion. I think about a sportswear brand, right? Let's assume that you own a sportswear brand, and this is for people who just started out, right? They're just like running on a Sunday morning. You want to be welcoming. So how do you translate that into motion? So the same adjectives that you use to describe your brand can be really useful to your motion design system. So it has to be welcoming. So maybe like a bit of overshooting, a bit of squash and stretch. Um, when it bounces from one topic to another, it's got like a softer movement. It's not like linear or harsh or anything. And that helps you, connect with the people.
Are there any other examples? Again, I don't want to just make you list lots of examples, but I think this is such a subtle point that can only really be explained through examples. Is there anything that you're working on at the moment or recently where you don't necessarily need to say the client, but you can talk about the problem and the way that you're approaching it?
I think, as I said before, like there are like moments where the clients might have a references, and like this, I thought this is really, really cool. I thought this is really trendy. So maybe we can start with that. But I feel like, right, how this is going to help you to reach your clients or like your customers, how this is going to help um, make your digital experience more intuitive. And it's important to ask these questions every time. This is what we do, Ben and I. We always think about that first, and then we start designing. And another thing I would say is some people, like tend to create an experience in Figma, and then after spending so much time on it, they give it to the motion designer. And that is a bit a limit because the motion designer needs to work through the constraints of the design system. And I feel instead we should have design and motion in parallel. Well, motion influences design and design influences motion. That helps like a better, I think that's a better way of working. I think that's what Ben and I do actually. Like he designed something, he hasn't even finished it. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Maybe like we can take that and then resolve in this way through this transition. And then he looks at it and says, this is cool. Maybe like after this, we can have that. I think that's a better way of working. But then again, this is my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm gonna keep inviting you to dig in deeper here rather than just moving past it because I think this is like the heart of like why I wanted to talk to you about it. Couple of things you touched on which I don't want to like spin past, which is like turning adjectives into motion, and it makes me think like and then joining or at least keeping alongside design and motion in those early stages. Like maybe you could talk a little bit about how you work with clients, or indeed you and Ben at Studio Santo, like to find that those adjectives. Are you discussing them with the customer? Because I'm just interested, like once you have an opinion and a thought on like what it should be that's sort of summing up the brand or so how you're going to solve or serve the purpose. Like, do you ever find friction or do they not understand? And how do you get them to be on the same page if they have initially very different ideas?
So not with Studio Santo. We tend to work with really great people who want to do meaningful work, and they have like an open mindset, and they trust us. They trust our experience, and we're very collaborative since the very beginning. We're not much about the big reveal after 2 weeks. We keep like connecting with them and share our work in progress.
And how do you do that? Are you guys just like in a channel with each other? Like, what's the process there?
Yeah, we just like set up a call and like show like things in Figma or like quick raw MP4s, and we show an idea and where we're heading.
Mhm. And then you mentioned you're much more casual. Is there a kind of deliverable that you use to agree a kind of final state or a shared language when you're working on a new project?
Give me an example.
Like, brand guidelines or project guidelines or like
Yeah,
a
at the end
hero
of it,
video
like, I mean,
or
at the end of it, we create a toolkit
right.
that allows everyone to, come up with something different. Because for us, the toolkit doesn't mean that all the outputs have been explored. It's just like I give you all the tools to keep that brand consistent.
What does the toolkit look like? What is it? What does it comprise of?
It could be like Figma files, like a deck that shows like the strategy or like where the philosophy behind it and a couple of examples, and then you could download the After Effects files and dig into it.
So earlier you mentioned two words, expressive and functional, and I think we've spoken about motion systems or like the visual identity or the motion language of a brand. Like maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Like you're obviously not handing over a huge like library of templates or whatever because these people that you're working with can implement. You're really just discovering this aspect of the brand for them and then they can run with it. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what you meant by expressive versus functional motion, and then also just explain to people like, yeah, the difference between like a motion system versus a language or whatever you call it.
Yeah, so functional motion is informative motion, uh, is the motion that allows you to make, for example, digital experience more digestible, like how the content will come through the screen. Like it's in one paragraph at a time, will move up, will move down. And if that's so, is there is a why behind it, and why is the movie the way it does. And for um expressive, that's where like the brand really comes through, right? That's where it becomes like a way to express the brand's attitude. Like it could be like scaling, or it could be like um easings, those different values will frame your brand super quickly. And sometimes, even when it comes down to functional motion, I believe that people could understand what the brand is about without even reading the content, just the way it moves. I think that's something really important to think about.
And so
And
are you talking about like is the functional stuff just product based and then like the expressive stuff is just like brand and video and website, or is that too much of a
I
simplification?
would, yeah, I wouldn't simplify it that way. I think like even within a digital experience, you can have a bit of both. It's just important to understand that where the motion lives, because I think sometimes you have these amazing vision pieces where motion is larger than life. And it's great if it's a commercial, if it's on TV, if it's a video, but it's important to understand why this piece of motion will live within the digital constraints. And so sometimes just a little nudge, like a little spin can be enough to nudge a bigger motion design system.
Last question on context for this kind of like process I would ask for now is like why do clients come to you guys? Like are they big clients that already have like a very established brand for this area, but there's like a sub brand that they're working on, or are these new businesses? Like what's the kind of the call that
Yeah, we got different clients. Um, they could be established, it could be a startup, and we offer a complete design service from campaigns, product releases, brand identities, uh, immersive digital experiences, anything that connect the brand with people in a meaningful way or make it part of the lifestyle.
so just to close off the Apple era, like you if you think about how you went in terms of your skill set and your abilities and all of that stuff, like how did you come out? Were you like way better, or did you already go into Apple with like a lot of experience from previous work?
I think I believe that Apple made me a better motion designer for sure.
And then you met Ben there, right? Which is your co-founder of Studio Santo now. What was Ben doing then?
Yeah, that's where I met Ben, and later we became friends, and you know developed a closer way of working. And he was a design director over there, and we were working on different campaigns. And straight off the bat, we realized that our way of working was slightly different. We were like next to each other, and we were thinking, "Oh, you're designing that. I think like don't even finish it. Let me test it out. Let's see how it works. And let's see what comes next." And he was looking at the animation, and he was like, "Oh, this is really cool. Like maybe to resolve it this way when it comes to the next sequence." I thought that was more an organic way of working.
Yeah, it seems when you say it out loud, like the most common sense way of working, and yet it's like so often not. Um, well, it depends. I mean, it depends on your workflow, your project, and like other things. But like I can imagine how well that would work in a small team. Can you see that working well in big teams and larger projects, like having co-designer motion kind of like teams?
That's a really good question. I think could work. I think could work in a big company. If you have like a small team working on it. Um, the thing is, like, I do believe when working in small, you um reduce the noise. You get to clarity quicker. Not because you cut corners or anything. It just you tend to not drift that much. And within a big company, you have a lot of cooks, a lot of opinions, lots of ideas. So that can be quite a challenge sometimes.
Lots of stages as well. And
Yeah.
so you and Ben, do you guys work with contractors regularly, or is it nearly always you both sort of finishing or designing projects?
Yeah, sometimes we had to hire contractors. Maybe they could help us for the strategy, they could help us for 3D outputs, especially when it needs to be really well curated. That's something that we do.
Mhm. Okay, cool. So maybe we'll talk more about Studio Santo later, but like I didn't want to leave Google Creative Lab. So you went from Apple to there, is that right?
Yeah, Ben um, moved on to Creative Lab, and then he reached out to me saying, "Look, I'm working on a really cool project. I'm surrounded by talented people. Would be great if you jump on board." And after a few interviews and conversations, I managed to join Creative Lab. And I have to say, if at Apple I've learned my craft, at Creative Lab I've learned how to be more experimental. And why am I saying this? Is we were working on Pixel campaign, and you have to think, just to give you a bit of context, Apple products are surrounded by perfect 3D elements, and you feel like you're in a magical world. So that's why where everything is perfect. That's why you feel so compelled when you on the device, like I'm part of that perfect world. While for Pixel is for the underdogs. Pixel is for the real ones, the ones that want to make things, they don't care about what is cool by society. Um, so I thought it would be really good to have the product always in action and where it actually lives all the time, which is in the user's hands. But the challenge was, how do you make sure that you get that and have the phone always at the center of the screen, right? Because you can move it around and then people won't see anything. So we were looking for references with the team, but then we realized that this was something new. And so what do we do? And so we talk a bit and then we decided, why don't we make our own references? Why we go out and start recording ourselves? And so for a bit we tested things out, and then through panning or tracking, we come up with the foundation that the the campaign was built upon. So it was something that made me really proud of, me and the team.
So you mentioned this time at Google Creative Lab was understandably the period where you were not working on craft, but like being more experimental, and it offered you lots of time. Um, like what were you developing? Was it not necessarily like the tools that you were using, but like I guess like a broader mindset of things? Was it more that it opened your mind and allowed you to think creatively? Um,
Yeah, I think that's it actually. Like when we were working on the Pixel campaign, I realized that sometimes as a motion designers, we tend to say, I'm a really good motion designer because I know the After Effects inside out,
I say
or
that every day.
I know Cinema 4D. Yeah, I bet you do. Cinema 4D from A to Z, or Cavalry, because that's what the cool kids are working on. All these amazing tools. And there's nothing wrong in trying to learn the tools. I just want the you shouldn't let them define you. That's it. I wouldn't, that's a suggestion that I will give to anyone.
And
It's
also, like I found this when I was writing music a lot back in the day. Like you can so easily fall into the trap of like going into production, arrangement, orchestration mode before you've thought about like what the composition is feeling like, doing, expressing, and stuff like that. And so you move in, whether it's like you're writing for a string quartet or whether you're like producing an EDM track with these synths. You're thinking inside of the synths or inside of the string quartet like parameters, and you forget that not only can you break out of them, but they are absolutely defining what the kind of the problem is, or the kind of where you're going with it. And like, yeah, it's kind of like if you have a hammer, everything you see is a nail, whatever the phrase is with After Effects, or with
I
cinema,
think,
like, you know.
yeah, I think it's important to go back to why you've been hired. You've been hired for your ideas, your creativity, not how well you know After Effects.
Mhm. So you've got like a mixed skill set. You're obviously like you have design as part of your core, right? But you mentioned that Ben is kind of the designer and you're the motion
Yeah, I
motion
think
design.
me is I would say 90% motion designer and 10% digital designer, and Ben is 90% digital designer and 10% motion designer,
Okay,
and
where
that's
does
where
his
how we
motion
work.
stuff come online? Like, what does he do? Or does he just know enough to have the context? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He knows very well how sometimes motion can help the brand.
so he doesn't necessarily actually do anything. It's just really
He
the
could come
concept.
up, like with something that he has seen or something that he had in mind, and then
Uh-huh.
he describes it to me, and then build on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. So, like, when you're working together, what's the earliest stages of a project for you both? Is it actually just sitting back and talking and doing
Yeah,
rep and like
yeah,
avoiding tools and building anything?
yeah. We just have like a simple conversation, um, and then we start with few sketches. Even with the pencil, not something that requires you like a computer or Figma. And then bit by bit we understand the direction. And then we do, like if it's a vision piece or a commercial, we do an animatic, you
Uh-huh.
know, simple words or headlines. And then we come up with the pace, and then the soundtrack. and then we present it to our client, and then if we have the green light, we come with a structure and with the design.
Hmm. Okay, just returning to the skill sets thing about you and Ben and where it sits. So, and I know we talked about the value of like not going to tools, but let's actually talk about like skill set and tools and the practical side of what you do and like what you work in day to day. Like, obviously After Effects, like what's your kind of like process or yeah, your full skill set of the range of tools and techniques that you use?
Yeah, After Effects is definitely one. Um, Cinema 4D, where we need to do like 3D projects. Um, Although I don't know Cinema 4D again from A to Z, like we said before. Figma, I work on Figma quite a lot and do like quick prototypes with it. Um, I used Cavalry at the very beginning, like when it was just a beta. Um, AI, a lot, like we use AI for like,
Using it,
well, mainly for concepts, like tools like
just like the ideation phase, not.
yeah, ideation phase, exploration phase with Midjourney or Runway.
How much
Uh,
time do you think that saves you compared to like the way that you used to do it? Does it save it a lot of time, or is it more that you're just exploring more possibilities?
I think that helps you. Sometimes you're looking for references, right? Sometimes their references is not quite there, so you can go out and like we did after, like we did a creative lab and record it ourselves. But sometimes you need to structure things slightly differently, and you might need like tools like AI that support your creativity.
So I guess the last question I have on Studio Santo and like the way that you've worked over the years is it's probably coming from like me realizing that you guys work in a very different way to like a traditional agency that at least I would be aware of, or your standard like freelance motion designer would be aware of. It's like it's not necessarily that you're making all of the thing and then they're shipping the thing. It's more that you're just part of a wider process, whether that work gets used or not, and it's just an internal thing, or whether it parts of your work are just sort of like pushing the brand in a certain way. Is that a fair like yeah, help me understand if that is the way that you guys work, if that's a fair explanation.
Yeah, you pretty much got it right. I think clients, when reach out to us, they're looking for ideas for their established brand or maybe for a sub brand um, that might be quite similar to their bigger brands, but not quite the same. So they want to have different ideas how that could come across, and or like digital experiences or campaigns, um, or sometimes it's a new sub brand, completely different, and so we build brand identities with them.
So it's kind of like you guys took the approach of Google Labs, or the role of Google Labs, and now do that for different businesses. Would that be a fair,
Yeah,
simple way
I,
of putting it?
I would say so. I believe that I've learned a lot by working in such a big companies like Apple and Google.
Yeah, because it's not like, a lot of the people who come on this podcast are like individual contributors or like part of a team where they can say, I did this, like, look, it's right there. And in a sense, it feels like a lot of what you do gets subsumed in a good way or goes underneath. And you can't like pull together a showreel necessarily and say all of this was ours. Am I right?
Well, I mean, you never know. Like, we got a few projects at the moment, and
Or it's
one
a mix
day,
at least.
yeah, exactly. And there's
Yeah.
something that we're really proud of,
Like
especially the
motion
output.
design guidelines, but not even that. It's like, yeah, the language, establishing the language of motion and design in a company or in a brand.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay, really interesting. Um, Sort of moving towards finishing up, I have to ask about like the AI piece and like where you're at with that. You mentioned you use Midjourney and stuff like that. Like maybe you could answer two questions, like where's Studio Santo going, and how are you watching this whole landscape of AI evolving and stuff like that, and how it's affecting design and motion? Do you have any kind of reflections on that and where you guys will be in the next few years, or indeed where all designers and motion designers will be in the next few years?
I think there's a lot of drama about AI, like especially on LinkedIn, those platforms love the drama. Um, you know, is designed dead or uh, AI will replace us one day. And I think it's important to see AI like a tool. It's not the product, it's leverage. And if you understand the world we're living in and you talk to people, you will find out that we share the same commonality and the same needs. And as long as you understand that, AI will help you to get there. But in a way, you need to know where there is, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the fact that we are not the tool. Sometimes we, even on LinkedIn, we show off all these amazing features that the tool has. But in a way, we should be more aware of showing off our qualities of being creative, not the other way around. And in terms of where Studio Santo is going, we don't really like to think too ahead. Um, but one thing that we'd love to do is to expand our team and keep working with great people who want to do meaningful work.
But keep the team and the collaboration small in that way that you described, like without losing
Yes.
that, like
So we
that
get to
velocity
clarity.
and that
Yeah, yeah,
exchange. Yeah,
absolutely. 100%.
cool. Antonino, thanks so much for having a chat. I really appreciate it. It's been great to
Thanks
hear
for
about
having
this.
me.